ahead and I want to review Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania. As I said before, this is a regular review. This is a non-spoiler review, chat. This is a big movie. This is the start of Phase 5 of the MCU saga, chat. You know, they're introduced a lot of new things with this particular film that will kind of set the course for, I imagine, a lot of content we're going to be seeing in Phase 5. And for those of you who don't know, it follows Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, and Hope Van Dyne, played by Evangeline Lilly, as they are transported to the quantum realm along with, their family, chat, to face Kang the Conqueror, who's this tyrannical leader and ruler of this realm. Before I get into my overall thoughts on this particular movie, I did want to discuss, just my opinions on the Ant-Man film series in general, and just the Ant-Man character and how he's been used throughout the MCU. Recently just did my spoiler review for the original Ant-Man, chat, and I really liked that movie. I looked at it as a nice palate cleanser after Avengers Age of Ultron, which I was pretty mixed on. I think a lot of people were pretty mixed on. Some good moments, but definitely some bad moments too. But Ant-Man was just nice. It's like, hey, who would have thought, years ago, chat, we would be getting an Ant-Man movie, relatively D-list character, but it was fun. I liked that it was genre bending. It was a superhero film, but it was also a heist movie, chat. And I thought Paul Rudd was well cast, and I really liked Michael, Douglas in the movie. I thought Evangeline Lilly was pretty fun. Has a couple issues, but overall, really enjoyable movie. And, Ant-Man the Wasp, again, I guess it kind of acted as a palate cleanser in a way to Avengers Infinity War, right? Infinity War was such a huge improvement over Ultron, in my opinion. And, I don't know, Ant-Man the Wasp, it felt like it was treading water, that they really leaned into the comedy with that movie. That, to me, just felt like a comedy. Through and through. Didn't particularly care for the villain. Really, the only parts of the movie I actually really enjoyed. I love the dynamic between, Scott Lang, his daughter Cassie, in both films. Thought that was great. And I did like that eventually Lily got more to do finally as the Wasp. That was cool to see. And obviously we were introduced to Michelle Pfeiffer, though I don't think she gets exactly a lot to do in that movie. It was cool to see her and, of course, her and Michael Douglas interact. But yeah, the villain, that was disappointing. Didn't particularly care for the action sequences. It felt stale. That movie felt very formulaic, and I was disappointed by it. I think it's one of the more disappointing entries in the MCU, and that brings us to Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania, and leading up into the release of this film, how they describe this movie really interested me. I like that they're like, hey, this is going to be a departure from most certainly, the previous movie, but also, the original one, and where this is going to be a grand sci-fi adventure. We're really going to explore the quantum realm and introduce a truly, terrifying villain in Kang the Conqueror. And so going in, I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a cool start to, Phase 5, and it's with Ant-Man. He's always kind of dealt with like a lot of lower stakes things, there's no doubt, but obviously I like how the character was used throughout the MCU. I mean, he's one of the big saviors in Avengers Endgame, chat, of course, and I like, how he's featured also in Captain America Civil War. I mean, he's used well. The character's actually used pretty well across the board in both his own films and also in the films that he occasionally shows up in. But here I was like, wow, the stakes seem pretty high for this movie. But, over the last week or so, a lot of reviews have been coming out. And, a lot of people have been saying that, oh, this movie is terrible. It's the worst Marvel movie ever made. It's disappointing for a variety of reasons. And even from people I know, a lot of people really dislike this movie. And so going in, I was like, oh, shit. I was kind of bummed to hear that. And so I lowered my expectations going in. And I have to say, chat, I have to be honest with you. What I personally saw was a very entertaining entry in the Ant-Man franchise. And I think a solid start to Phase 5 of the MCU. For me, I think, this movie is a nice change of pace for the Ant-Man films. It's a genre-bending movie, much in the same way as the first one, where that one was more of a heist film. For this one, I noticed there's a lot in common with hard sci-fi films of the 1950s and 60s and 70s in terms of its aesthetics and storytelling. And there's been this one criticism I've heard over and over and over again about this movie, that's being lobbed at it constantly, is that this is just a comedy. This is the same as Ant-Man the Wasp, even more of a comedy than Ant-Man the Wasp. And I'm sorry, but I vehemently disagree with that. It definitely has comedic moments, but it's not nearly as concerned with comedy as Ant-Man 1, and certainly not as much as the sequel, which I do think is just a comedy, run-of-the-mill comedy. You know, comedy, of course, is subjective, as I said many times on here. It's the most subjective of genres. And listen, not every joke hit for me in this movie, but I found a number of the comedic moments and gags to be actually quite funny. I think they were really enjoyable. To me, like, the thing that I'm finding that other people are talking about, you know, they're just saying, oh, it's a comedy, it's a comedy. This is very much a sci-fi fantasy adventure film. You know, and it brings up and references a number of scientific facts, theories, and it showcases a lot of those things throughout this entire movie. That's what I know. This is the most science theory based MCU movie I think we've gotten yet. You know, where people are saying that it's the most goofy. There's goofy moments, certainly, but not to the degree as I think, you know, some of the previous films. You know, now, and the other thing I really liked about the movie, you know, in terms of the characters, you know, Paul Rudd, Catherine Newton, who was recast as Cassie, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Jonathan Majors are the standouts for me. You know, obviously, you know, Paul Rudd, he's typically a comedic actor. Not that he's not capable of drama. We've seen him do so. But, you know, how he's playing Ant-Man is typically as a comedic character. You know, someone who's an ex-com trying to do the best thing possible. You know, he does a bad thing for the right reasons, if we will. And we've seen that throughout, you know, his entire arc throughout the MCU. And Paul Rudd, he just feels very confident as the character now. I like how he's presented here, where people are like, oh, we were actually, like, the public is so incredibly thankful towards Ant-Man, towards Scott Lang for what he did and contributed during the events of Endgame. I mean, he is more heroic than ever, and I really like that. He seems to be in, like, a really good place in his life, and he's happy. Whereas, like, it's funny, like, we've seen a lot of characters in Phase 4 of the MCU, and they've been dealing with fallout. They've lost so much, you know, from Doctor Strange to Thor. To the characters within, you know, the Black Panther films in Wakanda. And to me, it was refreshing to see, like, wow, everything's really finally going right in Scott Lang's life. I feel like he's not in prison. You know, his family seems happy, like he has a sense of structure, and he's enjoying his success. And so that was like, oh, wow, you know, that to me was a little different. It's something just I didn't expect for that. He's a better person. And I, you know, how he goes throughout this film, his entire story, and, you know, how he struggles, and, you know, him just trying to protect his family, especially like his daughter. And this goes into, you know, Catherine Newton's performance as Cassie Lane. You know, he's concerned for he doesn't want her to go down the same path as he did when he was younger. He made all these mistakes, even though we're seeing that she's making some of these, you know, mistakes. I think Catherine Newton was very fun in this movie as his daughter. Obviously, you know, it was the big hubbub with the recasting, and I feel sorry for that actress who, you know, I thought did a fine job in Endgame. That moment in Endgame when Scott Lang realizes, like, he's missed all these years with his daughter, like, everything, like the shock, the realization, the grief, and the acceptance, they all play in that one scene. I thought that was handled very well in Endgame. Like, Ant-Man's really one of the big standouts of that movie. I don't think it gets enough credit. And I liked her a lot. You know, but, you know, Catherine Newton, I know she's done a lot more stuff. She was in that film with Vince Vaughn, Freaky, I think it was called Freaky. And so, yeah, here, I thought she was a lot of fun. You know, she's very much her father's daughter, and she gets a number of cool moments in this film. Her and Paul Rudd have a wonderful chemistry. It's very much them together through a lot of this film. They're a great duo in how they go back and forth, and how he's teaching her how to be an ant person. I found that very amusing and cute. You know, the father-daughter dynamic is consistent throughout the Ant-Man film series, and it remains so here, right here. But, you know, I'd be remiss not to mention the two best characters in this movie, and Michelle Pfeiffer. I mean, the movie opens up with Michelle Pfeiffer in a wonderful cold opening. But she gets so much to do in this film, because for those that don't know, she spent a lot of her time stuck in the quantum realm. Her character of Janet Van Dyne, for what, 30 years or something, like 25 years. And so she knows the ins and outs of this entire realm, this entire dimension. And, you know, she's harboring a lot of secrets. And, you know, she's very much the Wasp of this movie, because we're going to get to one of my big criticisms of the film, but she's very much the Wasp to Paul Rudd's Ant-Man in this film. And her dynamic and chemistry, which I just didn't expect, but I was like, oh yeah, I guess it would make sense that these two would know each other and they'd have so much to do with each other. But her chemistry of Jonathan Majors is wonderful. And Jonathan Majors, Jeff, for those of you who are concerned, it's like, can we find someone as interesting and dynamic and threatening as Thanos from, the previous Infinity Saga and all those very phases? Like, yes, he completely delivers as Kang the Conqueror. I mean, there's like this wonderful, and it's similar to Thanos in a way where there's this quiet menace to him. Like, he doesn't feel the need to always raise his voice. And he just has control of a room when he enters it, and he'll let you know. I mean, when he tells you to be quiet, you're gonna be quiet, and I love that. But when he raises his voice, like there's a lot. He has a lot of great lines in the film, and he gets a lot of exposition, which is always very difficult for an actor when you gotta deliver just a lot of word vomit. The way in which he delivers a lot of that exposition, I think is quite good. Explaining why he's in the quantum realm, what happened to him. I think they did a good job of that. But like he has a line where it's like, I am Kang, and I was like, okay. I was like, yes. It was very comic booky. Like you imagine like a big splash page, and you have a villain like Doctor Doom is like, the Avengers will know only Doom, or or Kang like just saying I am Kang. I was like, I believe it. I loved him in the movie. He was fantastic in every scene that he was in. And the other actor who I don't think is getting a lot of credit, I think still was fun. I think Michael Douglas is good in the movie too. He gets a number of great moments, some nice little surprises. What happens to his character, and especially towards like the third act. I thought that was pretty cool. He's just not relegated to the background. Sadly, the person who is relegated to the background, Chad, of the principal cast, who was featured in the previous two movies, is Evangeline Lilly. Not that she doesn't have some cool moments, but it's mostly, again, towards the third act. She's just very underused in the movie, and she's just kind of there to listen to what Michelle Pfeiffer has to say. Like, Michelle Pfeiffer, I know this is called Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania, and to me, like, I think a lot of people are saying, like, you should just be called Ant-Man Quantumania, honestly. Unless you consider Michelle Pfeiffer to be the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, because yeah, it's her and Paul Rudd's movie, along with Jonathan Majors. She gets the lion's share of screen time outside of Paul Rudd. Well, Evangeline Lilly sadly did this. Yeah, she's there for action scenes. She's there to listen, and she doesn't exactly get a lot to do. And I think that's frustrating. That's disappointing because she was one of the. I mean, she was great in the first Ant-Man, and she was one of the things I liked the most about the sequel. Here, not a lot. Not a lot, underused, and, I would like to see more of this character. Although I like her relationship. Her and Paul Rudd have chemistry, but we don't really, honestly, see them on screen for a lot of the time, with the exception of the third act, which I really enjoyed. The aesthetic of the movie, I think, is going to be polarizing a lot of people. Listen, it is very CGI heavy. But I enjoyed it for the most part, and it wears its influences on its sleeves. It's a lot of inner space. A lot of, like I told you, Chad, like just a lot of, sci-fi. It got a lot of inspiration from sci-fi movies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and obviously into the 80s, something like Inner Space. Just the design and like, okay, if we find like a world that is so small, pocket dimension. I mean, it wears all that. I like the look. But, there's a lot of green screen, and there's a lot of CGI, and I can see that being overwhelming, a bit of a turnoff. To a lot of people. I compare it to, but the thing about it is, the thing that didn't, even I'm like, okay, this is a lot. And there's some characters that are CGI heavy, and I'm like, yeah, I'm mixed on this. This needed additional renders. You could have done a better job with that. And we'll get into those characters in just a bit. I compare it to something like Avatar, though, where Avatar, yes, is absolutely much better looking than something like Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania. The big difference, I think, between something like Avatar 2, Blue on Blue, and Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania is that I actually care about the characters in Ant-Man the Wasp, where I don't give a shit about any of those, one-note characters from Avatar 2, Blue and Blue, all those fucking kids, Jake Sully and his Knick Knacks kitty cat kids. I was like, I don't care about any of them. Where here, I was like, at least I care about the people that's, what's happening in these scenes, even though they're very CGI heavy. But I like it, this play around with colors and things, a lot of oranges and purples and reds. Like, I like the color palette. That was pretty good. But I could see people going like, this is just a lot. I just want people to like physically interact with something. And they do. They have sets. They have, again, a lot of retro 50s, 60s, 70s sci-fi sets. And I'm like, I thought that was cool. But there's a lot of CGI, and I can see that being overwhelming and a turnoff to some people. you know, some other criticisms I have of the film, it's got some tropes. It's got some tropes that I'm like, that are tired, and we've seen time and time again. The big one, obviously, is, hey, everyone's speaking a foreign language. How do we get our characters understand them to understand this language? It's like, have them drink some goop. And I was like, okay. And I'm the guy that I'm like, listen, I am totally okay exploring the galaxy or different dimensions, and they just all speak English already. I'm not one of those sticklers where it's just like, you gotta explain the language barrier. It's like, just have them speak English. I don't give a shit. Most of the time I forget. It's only when a scene like this happens, you know, because in Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, it's like, everyone speaks English. You know, I think you like offhandedly, they mention translators, but it's like so offhand that you almost forget that it's in there. But I never questioned that fucking rockets speak in English, or, you know, any of the other, you know, alien characters those movies are speaking. I was like, yeah, just because it's not really brought up. And if it is brought up, it's brought up so subtly that you don't even remember it, right? Like me. In this movie, they make it a point like, you got to drink the goop to understand the language. I'm like, you probably shouldn't even done that. Just have them where they all speak fucking English. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I don't give a shit. Well, because you do that, and because it's like such a thing in the movie, it's like, guys, you can move past this. You could have cut that completely. It kind of ends on a comedic note, which is funny. Drink the goop, but it was unnecessary. And listen, there is a lot of exposition in this film. There's a lot of people explaining scientific terms and quantum mechanics and scientific, you know, theories. And, you know, I feel like they try to do that as interestingly as possible, giving you a nice visual. And they give a lot of that to Jonathan Majors, who is able to sell it very, very well because of how intimidating he is, both when he's quiet and when he's loud. And I like that. And through a lot of his conversations with Michelle Pfeiffer, Janet Van Dyne, I did enjoy that. That works. But, you know, it is exposition heavy, and I think that's a fair criticism too. But I think for the most part, they're able to sell that pretty well. And probably the most divisive thing about the movie, and I could definitely see this from its aesthetic, its design, is Modoc. I don't want to get into, I mean, even though the spoiler's already out there for Modoc, you know, especially, they showed, I think, way too much in these trailers. I would have, you know, kept these closer to the chest, if you will, chat. But the design for Modoc, who obviously difficult character to bring to live action, you know, there have been a lot of attempts to do so. I think one of the better looks of the character was in the Avengers video game, where he's grotesque and he's gross and he's got pimples all over his face. Here, it's just it's not great CGI for him. And I think you could say, like, well, they wanted to just make him look goofy, and he's very much there. He's both there for comedy, but he's also fucking terrifying because, you know, he lives up to his acronym, Chad. He is only designed for killing. He kills a lot of people in this. His design is not very good. I was like, you could have done something a little different or changed this up. It just looks like they stretched an actor's face. And I was like, yeah. Now, I will say, though, the scenes with Modoc, though, like how he's interacting with the characters, whether it be our main cast of heroes like Scott Lane or Cassie, or even to the villains like Kane, I really enjoyed. I thought those were all really cool, and they did something. Listen, I can see hardcore comic book fans being upset what they do with Modoc, because it's very different from the comics. It's not like he's a creation of AIM and everything. Like he was this, janitor or something, or this office worker, and they turned him into this abomination as an experiment, and he ended up being the leader. It's like, it's not that. It's not that at all. You know, instead, it's very much connected to the previous Ant-Man films. But, you know, what they end up doing with him is, I find very amusing. He has, like, one of my favorite lines in the movie. I don't even want to say what it is because it's so funny. And he has some good moments with the principal cast. And so I don't like the way he looks, but I like how he's used in the film. And I feel like that's going to definitely be divisive for a lot of people. And just maybe the overall aesthetic of the movie as well. A lot of CGI. Which, again, I could see that people are like, I'm just kind of done. I just want to see practical effects. Believe me, I'm all about that. But, you know, it's a CGI glut. The thing is, though, this movie, I feel like it does more right than wrong. I really love what they did with Paul Rudd and Catherine Newton and Michelle Pfeiffer and Jonathan Majors are the biggest standouts. I was shocked at how much I really liked Michelle Pfeiffer and how much they gave her to do. It's so much of it is her story and her connection with Kane. I think it's just so interesting. I really love there are so many moments in this movie where there's a lot going on. There's big climactic, huge battles and everything. But, you know, some of the best moments in this film are when people are just sitting down and talking to each other. And a lot of that is between Michelle Pfeiffer and Kane, and also between Paul Rudd, Catherine Newton, and Jonathan Majors as Kane. Those are some of the my favorite moments in the movie. Again, it just shows how menacing this character is and how people are just like trying to figure him out. It's really interesting. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I think this is a huge improvement over Ant-Man the Wasp, which I thought was just this movie that was treading water, didn't really add too much of the MCU outside of of the Wasp herself, of course, and some nice moments, wholesome moments between Ant-Man and his daughter, and setting up for Endgame, of course. But this movie, I just felt like it had a lot, and it had a lot going on that I found interesting and fascinating and fun. It has a couple issues, and I brought those issues up, but nothing to the point where I thought this, like some people have been saying, and I just disagree, that this is the worst Marvel movie ever made. I'm like, I have seen Morbius. I have seen so many. I mean, even in the MCU. I watch this 1,000 times over watching Eternals again one more time. Absolutely. Or Thor: The Dark World, or Iron Man 2. That to me is I don't know. I don't agree with that. I vehemently disagree with that point. It's pretty much on par with the first Ant-Man for me. It's genre bending. It's doing something different. Has a couple of issues, as I brought up. I think it's a fun time. If I had to give this a rating on the Double Toasted scale, to me this is a high matinee. I found this really enjoyable. But hey, that's just how I feel about the movie, chat. I know a lot of people don't feel the same way as I do, but I thought it was very good. That was very good, and it's actually a Marvel movie I'm excited to see again and actually own. And it definitely fixed a lot of the things I disliked about Ant-Man and the Wasp. But that's how I feel, chat. What about you guys? How did you feel about Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania? Let me know.